Well, good morning. Morning. You guys have a lot of spirit here in Detroit. It's really nice to be here with you. And if you didn't catch the announcement, my name is Dave Pocta. And I think I was here 10 years ago when Tom and Lori Wilson were leading the church. That was our last time here in Detroit, so it's really an honor to be back here with you. You have had a number of our friends through here in your ministry leadership. Tom and Lori, of course. Wilner and Chantel Cornley are really good friends of ours. And in fact, I have a scholarship at school that's named after Wilner in his honor. The Wilner Cornley Memorial Scholarship. So that's fantastic. We love them. And Tom and Carol Newley were here, right? So Tom and Carol and Beth and I, my wife Beth and I, were in the ministry together in the early 90s in Chicago. So that was a great, great memory of being with them. I wanted to just say, before I say anything else, I didn't realize now that Detroit goes to the camp. You've been going for years to the camp in the Midwest. Yeah. Beth and I ran that camp for 11 years? Is that something like that? I have one. You're amazing. And I just want to say, I don't know if you are like camp people, if you really see the value of teen camp, preteen camp, young teen camp, but I will tell you, in 17 years, Beth and I worked in youth and family ministry in all different places around the world, and I will tell you that there is nothing that we've ever done that's more important, not more important, more transforming than camp is. Now, I would say the most important thing is your family, but camp is transformative. And so if you've never been to camp, if you're hesitating to register for camp, if you thought, I went to camp last year, I'm not going to go to camp. In fact, I wish they had kind of an adult camp. Right? Adult camp, right? So, go to camp. Anyway, so let me just tell you a little bit about me. I did a little yesterday. We had a great time. I thought I had a great time yesterday in our teaching event. So Beth and I became a Christian in Minneapolis in 1990 from the University of Minnesota. And my wife was converted actually in New York a couple of years before me, 1988, I think, right? So we met in the campus ministry in Minnesota, got married in 1992. Went in the ministry the year before that while we were still engaged, and we served in the full-time ministry from 1991 until 2 years ago. And we worked with adults, campus, all the different aspects of ministry, but we really found our home in teen and parent ministry. That just was our passion. We love teenagers, and we love parents of teenagers. Parents of teenagers need a lot of love and encouragement. Right? So if you see a parent of a teenager today, just give them a hug. You don't even have to tell them why. Just, I love you, and appreciate that. So teens, you should also do that with your parents. But just, I love you for putting up. I just love you. So they need that encouragement once in a while. So we really love that. We did that in Chicago for many years, but then that kind of took us on a journey to Africa. And we lived in Africa, in Johannesburg, South Africa, from 2010 to the end of 2013. In fact, the day Nelson Mandela passed away was the day after when we came back. Not because of that, but we came back. So my oldest daughter had graduated from high school, and so we came back to the U.S. and landed in San Antonio, Texas. Are there any Texans in here? No. I think this is the first group in the United States that I've actually asked that question, and they said there's no one that's responded. Texans, I guess, don't like Michigan. So, silly Texans. Right? So we've lived in Texas now for 5.5 years, and this is a picture of, this is a picture of our family. So my wife Beth and I have been married now for 27 years. My oldest daughter, Hannah, just got married 2 years ago. And so Hannah is married to Anastasio Coronado, or Tacho, we just call him Tacho. So he's from Del Rio, Texas, which is a border town in Mexico, Texas, on the border. He grew up there and came up to San Antonio for college and was converted into campus ministry. And we praise Jesus for that, because he's a wonderful son-in-law. So they've been married now for 2 years, and they are serving in the ministry there in San Antonio. So my youngest daughter, Madeline, she's 21. She just graduated from college at UTSA, which is in San Antonio. And we'll see what she does. We don't know what's going to happen yet with her. So, but yeah, so that's our family. So we're all right now in San Antonio, and we're enjoying it while we're actually all together. So 2 years ago, I resigned from the ministry and decided to go back to school and pursue a PhD in spirituality. And so that's what we talked a little bit about yesterday. What is spirituality? But this is now kind of my second family. There are 16 of us that are in this PhD program, and we have 3 nuns from Vietnam, 2 nuns from Kenya, 1 from Uganda, a priest from Zambia, and then a few of us Americans are kind of scattered amongst the group. So that is the crew that I spend a lot of my time with now, studying how people have walked with God for the last 2,000 years. It's a lot of fun. So that is a little bit about me. So what I want to do today is I want to bring to you a story, a book of the Bible that you may be familiar with, but maybe will be different for you today. Have you actually ever been surprised when you actually expected something, but you were surprised anyway? Has that ever happened to you? So I have 2 African stories I'm going to tell you today. We had a lot of really neat experiences in Africa, and I won't tell you about the large spiders and but I will tell you about this day that we had some friends that were visiting, and we took them to the Lion and Rhino Park. Now the Lion and Rhino Park is 45 minutes away from our house, and it's wonderful. You drive there and you go and you get to pet baby lion cubs and hold them and see all these different animals, but they have this special enclosure with adult lions that you drive your car into so that you can actually see them kind of in a natural habitat. So, there's a little trepidation, right, when you go in there and you drive up and you roll down your window and the guard meets you and they give you a half piece of paper that says, "I will not roll down my window. I will not get out of the car. And then you sign it, like, don't be stupid. Just, basically that's what it says. Don't be stupid, and then we'll let you in. And so you sign the paper and you drive in. Well, if you know anything about lions, they live kind of in high grass so that they can stay camouflaged. And so, of course, to create their habitat, it's high grass with a dirt road. And the dirt road kind of winds and, moves up and down. And so, the moment you come in, you're looking for lions. So we're driving, nothing. We're driving, nothing. And we're there for a while and saw no lions. It's possible that they just stayed hidden the whole time. So we're coming up a hill, and right as I come up the hill and turn the corner, I look out of the front of my car, and this is what I see. These 2 lions sleeping on the road. And, you realize when you pull up to them, certainly how massive they are, but then you go, what do I do? Because now they're in my way. And so we're sitting there and, you're in awe and you're taking pictures and you can almost feel them breathing. There's just such a deep kind of guttural, even the way that they breathe. And then all of a sudden, and again, you're fully expecting to see a lion because you drive in to see the lion, but then it's like completely unexpected when you actually encounter the lion. But then this big male stands up right in front of the car. And I realize this thing is as tall as my car is. Right? So it's pretty powerful. It's a pretty amazing experience. So what I really want to do today is I want to ask you, as we consider what we're going to study, the book of Jonah, is how well do you think you know the book of Jonah? And maybe today you'll be surprised. Because the book of Jonah has some things to tell us that actually are counter, they're against, they're different than the way we often think about Christianity. So let's dig in and see what it has to say. Now, I'm going to do a little, because, I'm a teacher, I do a lot of deeper academic work. We're going to do a little bit of academic work, and we'll do a little bit of application. So if you don't like the more intellectual academic, you can just tune out for the next 15 minutes. and come back in the second half. But some of us really like. Any of you more like that kind of the teaching, deeper? Okay, a few of you in here. A few nerds like myself. So what I want to do is that, first of all, I want to talk about a really important thing that we think about when we're reading Scripture. And that is this question: what does this text, this text that I'm reading, what does it contribute to my faith that's unique to the text? In other words, if we didn't have this passage, what would be missing from my understanding of God? So let me give you an example. If we only had the book of John and Mark as the Gospels, what would be missing from our understanding of Christianity? Well, one of the first things would be we don't have any birth narratives of Jesus.
Right.
So Matthew and Luke provide us a very unique perspective on the birth of Jesus Christ, right? And so when you read Matthew or you read Luke, you read it with that, okay, this is different than anything else, so what do I need to know that this is telling me? Does that make sense? So when we read the book of Jonah, one of the things that we have to ask ourselves is, what do we learn about God in the book of Jonah that we don't see anywhere else? And there are some really fun and unique things. So a few that are important for us to look at. It is unlike any other book of prophecy. Now, a book of prophecy, like Jonah's put in with all these minor prophets. You read Amos or Hosea or all these Haggai, and there's a pattern, there's a theme with prophets. First of all, when the prophet is called by God, they usually do what they're asked to do.
Yeah.
Right? Prophets usually are God's spokesperson and a good example of what to do. So that's unlike Jonah. Usually, a book of prophecy has to do with God's people.
Right.
It's actually a pronouncement for the Jews or the Israelites and what they're supposed to do to repent or change. And there's no pronouncement for Israel in Jonah.
Right.
We don't really know what kind of literature Jonah is. In other words, a lot of prophecy is filled with oracles, these kind of poetic sayings that cast this future judgment or future vision for what God's people are going to experience, or a judgment on another nation. We don't really have that. What kind of literature is the book of Jonah? Scholars have been kind of trying to figure that out for a long time. There's a lot of theories about that. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. Is Jonah a real historic story? So, we can look at Jonah and we say, well, we just believe in miracles. And, of course, Jonah was swallowed by a big fish. He lived in the belly for 3 days because God can do that. God can do that. But what's interesting about the book of Jonah, it's not like there's just one miracle that tells the story. It's all these obscure, strange things that happen over and over again in this book, almost as if it's this kind of mythical story to tell us about something deeper about God.
Right.
We'll spend a little bit more time talking about that. So some scholars see it as an historic reality, and some say that's a highly improbable, but there was something bigger going on than just a historic story. Okay? So, what did we see in this book? It's the upside down story. It's a story of things that shouldn't be. So we have things happen like God calling a prophet and the prophet runs the other direction. Or we see when Jonah's on the boat with the other sailors that are, they have these mythical, gods that they are praying to. They're really faithful. Jonah's not faithful.
Yeah.
Or we have the only possible solution is to throw the prophet overboard and drown in the sea. Interesting. Then he's swallowed by a large sea fish. Interesting. He sent not just to a Gentile nation, he sent to the most ruthless, bloody nation on earth, the Assyrians. Wow. Now, if you don't remember your Old Testament history, the Assyrians are the ones that captured Israel and took them into slavery in 722 BC. They were a bloody, horrible people from a Christian standpoint or a spiritual standpoint. So if you were to think today, if you were sent as a missionary, if God called you as a prophet to go to any nation of the world, like if you were to think of the worst place to be sent today, that's the most unlikely to respond to God, that would most likely kill or capture you, I mean, I'll let you imagine, where would that be, being sent, right? We have places on this earth you go, wow, if I was sent there, I can't imagine that anyone would respond to God, and I can't imagine I'd get out alive. Right? So that was certainly true then. So Nineveh was the most ruthless enemy. The other really unlikely thing, or interesting thing, is that the king of this nation that's completely ungodly and has captured God's people repents in sackcloth and ashes on a rumor that someone's proclaiming across the city. He never actually even has he ever sees Jonah. Right. He hears the rumor and he repents. Yeah. That's pretty amazing. The beasts wear sackcloth. In other words, not only do the people repent and put on sackcloth, they put it on their animals too. Yeah. Interesting. And then at the end of the story, God grows a plant over Jonah in one day, and then the worm comes and eats it, and it dies in one day. So it's kind of this upside-down story trying to get us to expand and stretch our imagination and ask the question, which I think is always the big question to ask, what's the big picture here? Right. What is God doing and saying? It is a story of the fantastical. It's a fish story. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So, is it history? Is it mythical? Now, we think of myth sometimes as this kind of fairy tale, like, the Easter Bunny's a myth. But myth played a different role in the Old Testament days. Myth played the role of understanding things beyond us by using a language and a story that drew us into this deeper place, right? That's the idea of mythology. So when you think about Roman mythology or Greek mythology, they didn't understand because they didn't have the scientific development that we do. They didn't understand where the rain came from. So they associated a God that must create the rain. Or they didn't understand where love came from. And so there's a little guy with a bow and arrow, and, shot you, and then all of a sudden you're struck by Cupid, right? And now you're madly in love. So they would have these explanations to try to understand the world they're living in, but they can't see the intangible, so they use myth to explain it. Satire. Is this satire? Satire is using humor and irony to express someone's stupidity. It uses humor, exaggeration, irony to express someone's stupidity. Would we say that's true of Jonah? No. Is Jonah? We'll let you judge later. So the book of Jonah is actually 4 chapters. It's not that long to read. It's usually, if you sit down and you just kind of read through the story, it's about a 6-minute story. And it's not that long, but there's 4 chapters. And the chapters kind of go 1, 2, 1, 2. So first chapter is about the non-Israelites, the Gentiles, the sailors. And then you go to Jonah's prayer, where Jonah kind of relents. We'll talk about that. Then you come back to the Gentiles again, the Ninevites. And then you have this really sad story of Jonah sulking at the whole last chapter. Okay, now, one other important academic thing that we need to look at that's important for Jonah, and it's the study of semiotics. Now, this really isn't an important word to understand, but signs is, because it's all over the scriptures. So what semiotics is it's the study of signs. A sign tells us about something else. So, for example, in the book of John, it's filled with signs. Yeah. When Jesus does a miracle, it's actually a sign about something bigger. Does that make sense? Yeah. So Jonah is filled with signs that teach us something bigger, and Jesus himself uses Jonah's signs in his own teaching. Okay? I'm going to show you 2 examples of how Jesus does that. One we see in the book of Matthew, when Jesus is teaching and he says, a wicked and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but none will be given it except for the sign of the prophet Jonah. Well, what does that mean? Jesus is saying, I'm not going to do any more miracles. I'm not going to show you anything else to prove that I am who you want me to prove that I am, because you already have a sign, and that sign is Jonah. Well, then you got to ask yourself, well, what does that mean? Right? What is the sign of Jonah? And the sign of Jonah was different in the book of Matthew than it was in the book of Luke. So sometimes Jesus uses the sign for one lesson, and other times he uses the sign for another lesson. Okay? So let's look at those really quick. So in the Matthew story, he uses the sign of Jonah by saying, Jonah was in the fish for 3 days, and I will be in the earth for 3 days. So you see what's happening. It's not about the literal experience that Jonah was in the belly of a fish. It's actually about this foreshadowing of what's going to happen with Jesus, that Jesus himself is going to be buried and seem to be dead, but he will come back to life, right? I mean, you imagine if you're caught in the belly of a fish for 3 days, you think you're going to come out on the other side okay? It's pretty miraculous. It's really a story about God delivering someone after 3 days in the belly of a fish, spitting him up on dry land as if nothing had happened. And here Jesus resurrects from the dead after 3 days. Jesus uses the sign differently when he's talking in the book of Luke, or when Luke is using this story. And Jesus is saying, as Jonah went to preach to the Ninevites, I am preaching to you. So he used the sign of Jonah as a prophet preaching judgment to the sign that Jesus himself would be the prophet preaching judgment. Okay? So that's the idea of signs. So let's talk a little bit about this story. I think we're done with the academic stuff, okay? Everybody else has to check back in now. All right? I know. You know, it's funny. I can see so much being up here. Right? I see who really enjoy, like, wow, that's really cool. And some of you are like, that's okay. We're all wired very differently, so that's all good. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at this story a little bit. If you want to open your Bibles to Jonah chapter 1, or you can just look with me on the screen, because I'm going to put all these scriptures up for us. Okay, so the first passage is this in Jonah chapter 1 and verse 1 to 3. It says, the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed to Tarshish. Okay, how many of you are familiar with the ancient Near East enough to know where he was supposed to go and where he actually went? You know, most of us don't know the Middle East that well. Let me show you a little bit of a picture. So if you were to look here, we'll see if I can show you this. So on this part of the map, this is right here. This is where Jerusalem is, Tyre, Sidon, all the ancient Near East, where a lot of the Bible stories happen. Okay? Now, that's where he lives, in that area. He's supposed to go, which my map doesn't even go to, way up over here to the right. That's where he's called to go, up into Assyria. So, you know where Tarshish is? Tarshish is right there. In other words, in the ancient world, the city on the edge of the known world, in the opposite direction, is Tarshish. And in order to, so this is the whole Mediterranean, so he would have to, in effect, start over here, go all the way across. This is Italy up here, and Spain, and Europe. This is at the tip of Spain. He would literally have to sail the entire distance of the Mediterranean Sea to get as far away from God as he possibly could. Have you ever felt that way?
Yeah.
Right, like I just want to go as far as I possibly can from my reality right now. Didn't work out so well for him, but that's what he tried to do. Okay, so here's another little picture of what ends up happening. So he gets on a boat in this place called Joppa. Now Joppa is right down here at the bottom. He tries to set sail. Remember, he's going that way. He ends up getting up here. He catches a storm, and the storm throws him out into the ocean. He gets swallowed by a fish, and guess where the fish spits him up? Right there. In other words, back closer to Nineveh than where he started, right? So he took the ship out, the fish brought him back close to Nineveh so that he had less distance to walk. So Jonah heads out for Tarshish, and what happens? It says, then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. All the sailors, not Jonah, all the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God. So they know, hey, if there's a storm here and we're about to die, what do? You pray. I mean, it's just a scary thought to imagine living in the ancient world and being tossed like a rag doll on the ocean, right? I mean, it just had to be a frightening experience. So where's Jonah in the middle of all this? Sleep. Tell us, who is responsible for making this trouble for us? The sailors asked. He answered, I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. I mean, you gotta imagine these guys going, what? We worship these gods that do these different things. You worship the God of the sea. You see us all dying here, and you're sleeping while we're praying. There's a problem here. Right? So he says, yeah, I know, I worship that God. So, what are they supposed to do? And they ask him, what should we do to make the sea calm for us? And, I mean, this is just, can you imagine saying this? Just, well, pick me up and throw me into the sea, and it will become calm. There's just this kind of, is it self-pity? I mean, where you care so little even about your own life that you're just going to be thrown into the sea, right? So that's his response. He doesn't care. This is an incredibly selfish act. If he can't escape, then he'll just kill himself. Jonah Chapter 1 and verse 15, so they took Jonah and they threw him overboard. And the raging sea grew calm. At this, the men greatly feared the Lord. And they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him. Here's the irony. Here's the prophet who knows God, who doesn't obey God, he doesn't pray to God, he doesn't offer sacrifices to God, he doesn't honor God. Here's the sailors that don't know God, that hear one little thing about God and how amazing he is, and they're offering sacrifices and taking vows. Right? That's the irony in the story. The salty sailors worship, not the prophet. Now, the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. And if you know the whole story, we're not going to be able to read all of chapter 2, but after 3 days, he crafts an amazing prayer. Which, I don't know. Why does it take 3 days? Why? Would it take you 3 days before you humbled out? I mean, it seems like if you're inside of a fish, it would take about 10 seconds for you to figure out, I need help here. Right? I mean, if you're really prideful and stubborn, maybe 10 minutes. But, I mean, what happens inside the belly of a fish after 30 minutes? Or a day. It's pretty crazy. So, it says, what happened here to I knew this was going to happen. It just stopped working. Boom, there we go. Okay, came back. Not here. Give me just a second. The whole thing just went haywire. So, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to close this. Is that, can you turn that on? Launch it? We're just going to go from memory then.
Yeah.
No, it's okay. I got it. If you have it on, I'll take the rest. Thanks, Ben. Assuming this works, which it now doesn't work. So, okay. Hey! You didn't really want a nice polished lesson today, did you? Just kind of go with the flow.
Great stuff.
Okay, so he's in the belly for 3 days. And in chapter 2, he says the prayer. And what happens in chapter 2, if you go from memory, and I know, a lot of you may not remember the details, but does he ever get to the point in chapter 2 where he says, God, I repent? No. I repent, I will obey. Wow. He doesn't. What he does in chapter 2 is he acknowledges, God, you're great. That's it. He relents, but he doesn't repent. And so because he kind of gives in and relents, the fish spits him up on the bank, and then God comes back and says this. The word of the Lord came to Jonah. Sound familiar? A second time, go to the great city of Nineveh and proclaim to it the message I give to you. You ever felt that way? Like, okay, God's told me to do something. I tried to find ways around it. It just keeps kind of coming back and confronting me again. Like you just can't get away from yourself, and you can't get away from the call. Some of us, it was like that for even becoming a Christian. Like, you tried not to become a Christian. You hid out. You know what I'm talking about. You hide out. You avoid. You see that person who keeps inviting you to church, and you go the other direction. I mean, it's like, I don't want to do this. That's what happened to me.
Right.
That happened to me, too. I was a student at the University of Minnesota. It's a pretty big school.
Yeah.
I think 70,000 students, So I was walking at campus one day, and two tall gentlemen came and invited me to church. And I thought, well, that's neat. I just started going back to Catholic church for Mass, and I thought, this is interesting. So I wrote down my phone number and gave it to them, but I had no intention of ever returning their calls. Right?
Yeah.
Do you ever have that happen to you?
Yeah.
So they call, they leave messages on my old recorder, and I didn't return their call. The next week, I'm on another part of campus, and I have two other people come and ask me if I want to come to a Bible study group. I'm like, weird. Do you know oh yeah, we're all in the same campus ministry. How big is this campus? Oh, there's 45 of us. So there's 45 of you, 70,000 of us on campus, and I'm meeting you twice in 2 weeks. And so I said, you know what? I've already given these guys my phone number. They've been calling. And so I walked on my way. This is not a fish story. 2 days later, I'm on another part of campus. There's three people walking towards me. There's a lot of people walking. But there's three people coming towards me, and one of the guys turns, and he says, excuse me for a minute. And I said, are you going to invite me to church? And he looked surprised, right? He goes, I actually was. And I go, okay, let's get together. It's just like, okay, I guess you can't run. And that's the way God works. There's just times when God wants to get your attention. So, what happens here? Go to the great city. God doesn't raise his voice. God doesn't get angry. He just spits him up out of a fish belly and says, go to Nineveh. All right, so Jonah began going on a day's journey into the city. Now, what it says about Nineveh, it was such a big city that to walk across it took 3 days. So Jonah gets into the city, and it's kind of hard to imagine him preaching or sharing or mumbling under his breath, the story. Because how does Jonah feel about Nineveh? He hates them. They are his sworn mortal enemies. There is no one on the planet that he has more hatred for. Maybe the Babylonians, but the Assyrians and the Babylonians are the mortal enemies of God's people. Right. And so, you get there, and he's like, 40 more days, and then we'll be overthrown. I don't know if he's preaching it. I don't know what's happening. It's the only sentence we actually have of Jonah speaking to the Ninevites. And so, the Ninevites, it just says the Ninevites believed God. What does God have to do? It's just Jonah. This is just Jonah saying you're going to be dead in 40 days. But it says that they believed God. A fast was proclaimed, and all of them, from the greatest to the least, put on sackcloth. That's like taking off all your clothes and putting a burlap sack on in the middle of the summer. That's kind of the idea. Putting on something that just is horrible to show your humility before God. When Jonah's warning reached the king, see that the warning rumor reached the king ahead of Jonah. He rose from his throne, took off his royal robes, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat down in the dust. Amazing. You ever seen a king do that? No. So Jonah's mad.
Oh, yeah.
Why is Jonah mad? Because the people repented.
Right.
Why is Jonah mad that the people repented? Because it's his enemies.
Yeah.
And why would God show mercy and grace and compassion to my enemies? Because when you're when you feel justified, and they were justified, when you feel justified in your anger, you feel justified for wrath, judgment. I mean, you want vengeance. You don't want mercy. And that's what's so powerful about what's happening in this story. So, it says in chapter 4, verse 1, but to Jonah, this seemed very wrong. He became angry. He prayed to the Lord, isn't this what I said, Lord, while I was still at home? In other words, this is the whole reason I didn't want to come. That is what I tried to forestall by fleeing to Tarshish. I knew that you're gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. Now, Lord, take away my life, for it is better for me to die than to live. So, God's mercy, God's grace, God's compassion for the lost world makes him so angry that he wants to die. Now, what kind of prophet is this? The Lord says, is it right for you to be angry? There's an interesting artist's rendition. It says, Jonah then leaves, and he goes and he sets up a booth. And he sits at the edge of the city, looking back at Nineveh, wondering what's going to happen. God's supposed to overturn it in 40 days. I don't know how long he sat there. But God grows this plant up, right, over him to provide shade. I mean, come on. When you have someone, and how many of you have teenagers? Or have had teenagers? Okay, good number of us. When your child throws a temper tantrum and sulks, when you go outside and it's 55 degrees and you see him shivering a little bit, do you want to bring him a coat? Like, no, shiver. I mean, look, most humans, we just don't have the kind of compassion that when our child rightly deserves punishment, that we're going to come and then do something really kind for them just out of the sake of kindness. And here God provides a plan to shade Jonah after he's an idiot. So God says to Jonah, after God sends the worm to eat the plant, is it right for you to be angry about the plant? Because now, in my kindness, I provide a plant, then I take it away, and now you have a bad attitude about the fact that I took away the kindness that I gave you. Is it right for you? He said, it is. I mean, it's like the best two little words, right? It is. And I'm so angry, I wish I were dead.
Oh, Jonah.
Okay, last two verses of the book of Jonah. The Lord says, you've been concerned about this plant. Though you did not tend it or make it grow, it sprang up overnight, it died overnight. And should I not have concern for a city as great as Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who, and this euphemism is basically saying, who really don't know better, who don't know their right from their left, who don't know the God of heaven, who don't know even a fraction of what you know, is it not right for me to show them compassion? And my favorite line in the entire book of Jonah, and also many animals. Right. In other words, if you were there yesterday, I asked you this question, does God care about your dog?
Yeah.
Absolutely he cares about your dog. I mean, God is saying they have animals. They've got cows and pigs and turtles, and you should care about them too.
Right.
That's just good justification for us animal lovers.
Yeah.
So we have this story that really is a fantastical story. And what is the lesson? Right? I think there's two big picture things that we really need to walk away with from the book of Jonah.
Come on, Dave.
What is the big idea? By hook or by crook, God's will be done. I think sometimes, and one of the great things about us in the International Churches of Christ, of which the Detroit Church of Christ is part, is we somehow have this idea that world evangelism, the salvation of the planet, somehow depends on us. I'm telling you, it does not. Now, God will do God's will on this earth. It's a blessing to be included in what God is doing. But we can't possibly think that the entire salvation of the planet somehow rests on our spirituality. God is bigger than that. Right? God is bigger. God will work through whoever He chooses to work. God will work through anyone, whether they have a bad attitude and barely do anything. The only thing Jonah did right is let his feet carry him to Nineveh after being swallowed by a fish, after running to Tarshish. That's really about all he did. And God used him to change a city. It's an honor to be used by God. So what does this sign mean for us? Two things. Number one, we are inadequate. Get used to it. Right? You know, one of the things, and I appreciate the brother that did our communion this morning. You cannot possibly be worthy to take communion. It's not possible. Now, the text actually says, don't take it in an unworthy manner. Which means be respectful, be humble, be grateful, understand what you're doing. Be reverent. Take it in a worthy manner, but you yourself cannot be worthy. Nothing you do actually puts you in a position so that you are somehow holy enough, pious enough, so that God can really use your life. God's grace is covering you all the time, every day, in spite of you. That's how God's grace works. God moves in people's hearts when He chooses to move in their hearts. And God, I mean, has anyone ever done something in here, or you just thought, I was not in any spiritual position for God to use me, but God used me anyway? Yeah. You ever felt that way? Yeah. That just shows you that God will use you and you are inadequate. So, what does that really mean? Stop trying to be a perfect Christian. Yeah. Don't wait to get your act together to go out and open your mouth. Don't wait until you've figured out your sin and how to be better before you're a good example at work. Don't wait because you're not going to get there. And stop beating yourself on the back with all that guilt that says, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough. No, you're not good enough. We all agree. Right? So just go. You know, being inadequate is a really scary feeling sometimes. We went on one of our vacations, we were given a little getaway to this place in the mountains up in South Africa. And it was beautiful. We pull up to the resort, we go in to check in, and there's a woman sitting behind the desk, and it's my wife and my two girls, and we come in, and she checks us in, and she goes, now you need to be aware of the baboons. Oh. I said, okay, so what does that mean? Well, the doors, there's two doors. There's a door that you come in when you come into your condo, and then there's like a steel prison gate. But the steel prison gate's not enough. There's a latch that you have to latch on the prison gate because the baboons can open both doors if you don't latch that second thing. I said, okay. And she said, and just so you know, they're not intimidated by women, you know, looking back at my wife and girls. And I said, okay. And she goes, they're also not intimidated by men of smaller stature. Okay, all right, I get it. Lock the door, lock the latch. You know, we go, we settle in, we brought our food. You know, it's one of those places that's got a kitchen. So we bring our food, we come in as a family, we put in our luggage, we put the food in the cupboards. And, you know, my wife and my older daughter go take a walk. My younger daughter goes and she's reading a book on the back patio. And I go take a shower. And I get out of the shower and I hear the most insane noises in my kitchen. Now, have you ever seen a baboon? I mean, they're intimidating. And they're thieves. They are thieves. So, I come around the corner, there's about 8 baboons in my kitchen. And I'm thinking through, they're not afraid of women, they're not afraid of people of stature, you know, what do I do? They are, I mean, if you see this guy, You see the bread? It is, that's what they do. They take it and they go. But they're in no hurry because they're not afraid of you. Because they have fangs. I mean, they stand, they stand about this tall. So, I come in and what's happening, there's one standing in the middle of the kitchen table. There's two on the counter, pillaging through the cupboards, taking the food, ripping it open, biting it, passing it to his buddies. There's 2 or 3 on the ground, receiving all the food falling from the cupboards. The guy that's on the table is eating and pooping at the same time. So, I'm trying to figure out what do I do. So, I stand on my tippy toes. And I puff out my chest. Get out! And it's hilarious. I mean, it wasn't hilarious at the time. It was actually quite frightening. They just kind of slowly turn around. They look at each other, and I'm like, get out! And they start gathering food, right? They start gathering food, and they like slowly trot out, pooping along the way. And I when it's all said and done, I'm just standing there mesmerized with just feces everywhere, food everywhere, freaked out, right? So, you ever felt inadequate? Right? I mean, that is really true. We are inadequate. God is, I wrestled with this. I don't even have a word. I had a number of different words. Ineffable means God is beyond description. God is undescribable. God is awesome. Is just so underrated, so overused, right? God is bigger. God is more loving. God is more compassionate. God is more gracious. He's just more. He's just more than you can imagine, and He's more than you need. He's just more. God is other. God is beyond. Right? And sometimes you just have to put things in perspective, and it's why I love nature. I mean, this is a real picture from Banff, Canada. Sometimes you just got to look and go, God is beyond. Right? And it works the other way too. Sometimes it's the little, delicate, beautiful, intricate. God is amazing. So what the whole goal is today, what I really wanted to do more than anything, is to tell you, you are inadequate. Feel good about that. Right? I hope you're encouraged by the guest speaker who told you, you are inadequate. But God is all that you need. Amen? So let's engage, not because of who we are, but because of who God is. Let's engage the world because they need to know what we know about God. Thank you.